Hey dads, welcome to Father Friend, a podcast for dads who want to lean in, lead well, and love big. I'm Dr. Mike Ayers. I was 18 the first time I visited my youth pastor's home. As I sat at the dinner table with Joey, his wife, and their 3-year-old son, I watched them talk, laugh, and enjoy each other. You know, be a family. And I was taking it all in. After dinner, Joey announced, "Okay, Russ, it's bedtime," and instructed his son to go with mom to get ready for bed. Then he said, "Come and give me a hug first." Russ climbed out of his chair and went over to his father. Joey pulled him into a big hug and gave him one of those tickle kisses. You know, the kind where you dig your whiskers into your child's neck. They laugh and squirm. Then he said, "I love you, buddy," and sent him down the hallway with a little pat on the butt. Growing up in a troubled home, I'd never really seen what a loving father looked like. That night, and in the months that followed, Joey showed me. I'd eat with his family, help him watch the kids. We'd pull weeds together in the backyard, repair his fence. We'd piddle in the garage and just talk. And through it all, I saw him love and lead his children. I wanted to experience what Joey had, the joy and wonder of being a dad. So today, I have a special treat. I'm getting to interview the man who became my best friend and my mentor, the man who led me to faith in Jesus and has been a model to me and supported me throughout my whole life. It would be very hard for me to overstate his impact. And I get to welcome him here today to the Father Friend podcast. So Joey, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and it's an honor for me to get to join you on your podcast.
As I told the audience, you've been a mentor to me for decades. And honestly, most of what I learned about being a good father came from watching you. I don't know how conscious you were of that, but I had learned so much from you in the way that you interacted with your children. So what's one thing that you did with your own kids that you're most proud of and one thing you wish you'd done differently?
Well, I've been blessed to have 3 really awesome kids. And just as a bit of introduction for your audience, my oldest son is Russ. He's 46 years old now. He's a doctor up in Oklahoma City. And he's married to Nicole, and between the two of them, they have 2 little girls. My middle child is Ryan. He's age 42. He worked for the Department of Defense for many years and recently took an early retirement with downsizing, DOD. And Ryan is married to his wife, Leslie, and they have a daughter and a son. They live in Frisco. And my youngest is a girl named Rachel. She's age 36. And she was in the entertainment business for years. And now she works at the corporate level of JP Morgan Chase Bank. She and her husband Sam, have 2 little boys. Now, for most of their lives, my friends and family have complimented their mother on what great kids we have and what they perceive to be the great job we did as parents. But the truth is that each of them in their successes in life have been a direct result of their choices, of their hard work, their forgiveness, their love, their relationship with God. All of those things, as I see it, come from them. And that's the thing I'm most proud of. The thing I wish I'd done is more difficult to discuss, more of a difficult question for me. I wish that I had never gotten divorced in the first place from my children's mother. And really the actions, the reasons that led up to that divorce were my fault. And that's something I really regret. That decision was the most selfish, self-centered thing I've ever done. My kid's mother was a godly woman. She cherished her kids and she did everything she could to make our family strong. And if I could take it all back, I definitely would. But God is grace and God is good to us. And He has been able to take all the mess that I created, getting the divorce and splitting up our family, and has made the best out of it. And I'll always be thankful for His forgiveness and willingness to continue working with me.
Yeah, completely relate to that. Of course, me walking through the same thing a few years ago. And in the end, as many, who are listening have walked through divorce or have walked through making really poor decisions and having some consequences of those decisions, is to cling to the grace of God, take ownership, responsibility, confession, but then again, finding forgiveness through Christ, not minimizing the work of Christ on the cross by our own unwillingness to receive that forgiveness that God offers us and believe that we still have a future even after those mistakes. So thank you for being honest about that. Going back to your comment about your kids and people complimenting you on your children, as I've looked at your kids, I just see so many wonderful things. But it's also true that, and you know this, that dads play a key role. People have said the same thing about my children, and I've had the same response of, wow, really, it's them, it's who they are, and it's the decisions that they've made. And yet at the same time, dads influence so much children's lives. So what I like to say is that we need to hear from dads who have walked that path that are ahead of us. I think getting that experience is really important. So let's talk about how you navigated your kids through the divorce. Because again, 1 out of every 2 marriages ended in divorce. And I know we've got some people listening to our podcast who have walked through the pain of this. And parenting young kids through divorce is not easy. So looking back, what were 2 or 3 non-negotiables that helped you serve your children through this transition and maintain presence with your kids during it?
That's a good question, Mike. I think that one of the biggest fears that kids have when their parents split up is that they're going to lose one or both of their parents. They've grown up in a situation where they had both parents, hopefully a loving, good, positive situation, and they're concerned, they're worried, they're afraid that this change that is happening is going to ruin all that and they'll never see one of their parents again. One of the things that was non-negotiable for me is that I did my best to make sure, and you and I have talked about this a lot, and that is to always be there, to keep calling, to keep writing texts, to keep showing up at all their events. And I know that when their mother and I split up, I still made sure that we went out to eat a couple of times a week. I took them to school whenever I could. We went on some short vacations, just the 4 of us. And I remember early on, we went on a float trip down the Illinois River in Oklahoma. And that was the first time when I looked back on it that I thought, okay, things are going to be okay. We're going to survive this. All along the way, one of the things I did was I made sure that we did fun things. Growing up, my father and I were estranged, best way to put it. But whenever he said, let's go to the lake, I always said yes. And that's how it's been with my kids. So one of the things I would encourage your listeners to do, especially divorced fathers out there, is get a boat. That's been the cornerstone of my relationship with my kids. One day I was talking to my daughter and I said, well, I hope wherever you live and wherever you go in the rest of your life, I hope you'll have a boat and I hope you'll have a lake. And she said, Dad, it's in my blood. And I think that was because we went out to the lake so often and had so many great times out there. I did my best not to miss a ball game or a dance competition or a school program. And I called them just about every day. I would often call my daughter, especially at night, tell her to good night. And we would always try to talk to her a bit about how her day went, that kind of thing. The reason that this worked is that the kids forgave me. They could have chosen to be mad or to be bitter or argumentative with me through the way, but they forgave me. They continued to love me. And I think that's what made this type of relationship with them possible.
It's such great wisdom. Of course, divorce is very difficult. The transition is very difficult for children. And I think some fathers, because of guilt or because of maybe a perception that their kids don't want them around anymore, disengaged, maybe they've become passive. And really the key is in making sure that you become as present in their lives as possible, regardless of the feelings that they might have and that they're going through, but to rise above those and to make sure that you stay plugged into their lives and not just shrink back and withdraw.
Yeah, as you and I have talked about before, I think it's critical to keep calling, to keep texting, to keep writing, to keep staying in touch, because even though you're not getting all the feedback, all the warm fuzzies that you hope they will respond with, that's your problem. You got to keep on calling. You got to keep on staying in touch. because you want them to grow up and live the rest of their lives knowing that you're there and that you'll always be with them. I think that's important.
That wisdom was very helpful to me, and I appreciated it. So let's discuss the transition from father to grandfather, which is a great transition. What surprised you most about becoming a grandpa? What are the joys that nobody tells you about?
My kids have the pleasure and the benefit of having multiple grandparents, at least 6. A couple of them have 8 grandparents. All these grandparents love them and cherish them, give them gifts, bake them cookies, all the things that grandparents are supposed to do. And I think that's really good for kids these days. And I try to do that as much as possible. So, when I was growing up, I lived a lot with my grandparents who lived out in West Texas, a little town called Mundy. And they lived on a farm. There's pigs and cows and watermelons and corn and, all the things that you think of in a small little farm operation. But we had such a great time with them, and they always did a great job for me. And I hope that even just a little bit of them has passed on through me to my kids. So we have 6 grandkids. They range in age from 1 up to 9. We have 3 boys and 3 girls. And sometimes people ask me this question about, do you love one more than the others? And I think that's a pretty tough question. Because you think about even your own kids, like your first generation of your kids, and then on down the line to your grandkids. Do you love one more than the other? And my position has been that each of the kids is different. And I love them all, but just in a different way. As they've grown up and, from the day they were born till to this day, years later, I see each one of them has a very unique relationship with me, with all their grandparents, and treat them in different ways. And it's just been a joy getting to know them, their idiosyncrasies, the things that make them funny or make them different. And so that's been a joy to get to know them and be able to love them. We like to sit around the table, and each person around the table, and this is me and my wife and all of our kids, grandkids, we like to tell stories. And each of the kids now have certain stories that they love, and they have some of my stories that I've told about growing up. And believe it or not, I've embellished them a little bit to make them a little bit more funny or a little bit more scary or whatever. They get a kick out of it. And now they've all developed their own stories as well. So that's been a real joy to share stories with my grandkids.
Yeah. You've managed to stay very engaged. You're in what we call quadrant 4 of fatherhood, the support stage, the friend stage. And you've managed to stay very engaged with both your adult kids and your grandchildren. It helps, of course, that they live close by, but what are some of the secrets that you've learned to staying plugged in? How do you maintain those relationships without being intrusive or taking over?
Mm-hmm. 2 of our kids and their families currently live in Frisco. So that's a pretty easy drive from our house in Sherman. It's about an hour or a little bit less. The other lives in Oklahoma City, which is also relatively close, but it hasn't always been that way. My kids have lived all over the place. They've lived in New York City, Houston, Washington, D.C., Amarillo, Interlochen, Michigan, Boston, Lubbock, Toronto, and even a traveling production that stopped in many of the major cities all around the country. And regardless of the distance, I think it's been important to stay in touch with them on a daily, if possible, basis and get together with them whenever possible. I can tell you there's been lots of tearful goodbyes at the airport, especially when my daughter was traveling a lot. But we tried to mix in a lot of phone calls and texts and handwritten notes, and hopefully all of those things help fill in the gaps.
The key is to initiate,
right,
and just to keep plugging away and figure out if your kids are living far away like my kids are. You've got to figure out ways of making trips, but doing FaceTime calls and texting and continuing that presence. And I think some grandparents and parents of adult children think, well, my kids should contact me. But, think back at that time in your life where my kids are, when I was building a career, when I had young children, and the time constraints and just the perspective about life, it's hard for them to be intentional about reaching out to parents. And so I think we've got to rise above that and be the mature part of that equation. And we initiate toward them and not just sit back and expect that they should.
Yeah, I think having proper expectations is important because we're reaching out to them. We're hoping to get a lot of warm fuzzies. We're hoping to get a hug, a kiss on the cheek. We're hoping that they call us with some kind of urgent questions that we can, give them all kinds of wisdom, from our experiences and so forth. But a lot of times it doesn't happen that way, regardless of how they return the favor. It's still our job, in my opinion, to stay in touch with them on a regular basis. And if you do that, then hopefully that will grow and mature through the years.
Yeah, them not being present in the home anymore. There were so many joys that you experience and emotions that you experience, those warm fuzzies you talk about as they're growing up. And then when they move out of the house, even going off to college, man, you don't have those same experiences and you miss them. And in the end, though, the craving is real and it's good, of course, but we can't use our children to meet our own emotional needs. And maybe at one point in time they did because they were right there. But as they become adults, we've got to learn. Our kids have to learn to live without us, but we have to learn to live without them. And that's a tough transition. Mm-hmm. If you could sit down with your younger self, with a younger version of yourself, maybe when your kids were 10 and 12, what's the one piece of fathering advice that you'd give that guy?
I think about dozens of things go through my mind. What I could have done differently, what I should have done differently, what I did right, what I did wrong. But I kind of zero in on a few key points that I think are really important. As I've already said in this interview, that staying in touch on a daily basis is extremely important. When we're living with a child who lives in our home, we see them before school, after school, at night, bedtime, breakfast time, all the time, each day. And I think that kind of relationship can still continue even as the kids begin to grow up. And of course, in the teen years, like you asked in the question. So staying in touch daily, they need to hear from you every day, I think is essential. Also, be together all that you can. It doesn't have to be special. I remember there was a book written, something about quality time. And quality time was described as going to Disneyland or going to the lake or going to some special thing. But I came to believe over time that the real special talks of life don't happen at quality time. You don't talk about problems at Disneyland. You don't talk about some kind of thing that's going on in their spiritual life when you're out on the town. Instead, that happens in the quiet moments, when you're driving, when you're sitting around the house, when you're reading together, when you're talking, when you're, just spending some time together. So quantity is more important than quality of time.
Yeah.
I also believe it's important to not miss their special events. I have special events at my work. I might get an award, or I have a special meeting, or I'm making a speech somewhere or something like that. And I want my kids to be there. Just think about in their lives, the choir program that they're in, or maybe a athletic event, whatever kind of sport they might be in, or some kind of special thing that they're doing. They want to look out into that crowd and see your face there. And I think that's extremely important. Don't miss their events, all of them, no excuses.
Yeah.
And what you're doing, you're planting some treasure, because sometimes you're going to miss. It's just going to happen. You're not going to make everything. But if you've banked a lot of good memories and a lot of support, and a lot of times when you were there, that's going to make up for the times that you absolutely had to miss. I think it's important to have fun. I think especially when our family is messed up, we're thinking we need to have a talk with the kids. So every time we get together, it's about, some kind of serious discussion or some kind of, let's talk about this or let's talk about that. I think that we should have fun whenever possible. And like I said earlier, get a boat. I think that's what I've done, and it's worked for me, but everyone's going to have their own niche that they really want to do. And last but not least, I would say never speak negatively about their mother. I brought them up, and I always expected them to show respect to me and to their mother. That doesn't change just because we're not together anymore. And so I don't want them to see me criticizing her or speaking about her in a negative way. And hopefully I can lead by example and they will do the same. So I think that's extremely important. I'm sure there's a lot more that I would think of if we spent some time thinking about it, but I'll have to think about those things.
Yeah, going back to what you said about presence, I like to talk about emotional memory, what our kids will end up feeling about us once they become adults and they look back on their lives. They won't remember everything we taught them, but they will remember how we made them feel. And so teaching is instruction. And of course, we have a job to coach and train our kids and to raise them up and to teach them certain things. But emotional memory is about presence. So that consistent presence, like you said, the difference between quantity of time and quality of time, both are important. It's really important to have a consistent, constant presence in the lives of our kids because you can't program special moments with your kids normally. You can't prepare them in advance. They happen often spontaneously, as you said. And so it's important that we are around when those moments come up and that we respond to them as we should. So thank you for that wisdom. And it's really important for us as busy dads to remember that we need to, in the midst of this busyness, find ways to have that kind of presence.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to have a meaningful talk on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So we've got to have some quiet times when we're not doing anything special that we can talk, we can laugh, we can, really get into some serious business together.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, we've got one more question. We could go on for a long time, but I've got one more question for you. We talk on this podcast about being a father friend, which means moving from authority-based to influence-based relationships as our kids grow. We're taking them from dependence upon us to interdependence with us to independence from us. And we've got to play different roles as that occurs as they grow up. So how have you seen that play out in your own journey as a dad? How did parenting change for you as your children moved from elementary to teens and then to young adulthood?
I think that's an interesting transition because it was not what I expected. I always felt like I had a lot to say to my kids, coached them along. I gave them advice, whether it was wanted or unwanted, very involved in every aspect of their lives in many different ways. But now that's different because now they have their own family. They have a spouse, they have children, they have their own jobs, they make their own money, they make their own decisions. All those things are important. And my role has definitely changed from being father to grandfather to the grandkids. And like you said, friends to the grown-up kids. I think there's a time when you transition from being in charge of the grandkids because it's important that we're going to follow their rules. We're going to use their form of discipline in whatever they prefer. And if they ask for advice, I still give it, but in limited quantities, very cautiously and very rarely. I just wait for them to ask me a question or to ask for some advice or something like that, and I still give it. I don't say, read a book or something like that. I give it my opinion, but I try to really hold back as much as I possibly can because of what I found, and maybe you have too. It's not unusual for me to offer advice that I get snapped back. You're crossing the line, Dad. That's not what I meant, or that's not what I want you to do. So I try to offer that very slowly and only when it's asked for. Our family does not revolve around me anymore. It revolves around my kids and their kids. So I've tried to be supportive. I've tried to make sure that if they call, if they want to get together, my wife and I have made a pact that whenever we get invited to something at their home or to a trip or to an activity or something, we always say yes, because we want to be with them as often as possible. And there's plenty of downtime. There's plenty of times when they're busy and they're doing their own thing. And that's normal and that's perfectly fine. But we try to say yes whenever we can. That's pretty important. We're there for love and support, and we feel like that's our role going forward.
Yeah, that's great. For people in the audience who are younger than where you and I are, you're about 10 years ahead of me, and I'm probably about 10 or 15 years ahead of the dads that I talk to in those stages. It's important to keep your eye on the long-term goal of equipping them, empowering your kids, and then encouraging them to live their lives. And that certainly shifts as they grow up. We go from them trusting us to us trusting them. And that's an important transition. So I want to thank you, Joey, so much for your time today. I literally do not know where I'd be as a man and as a father without your influence. And it's been a joy to talk to you, and a special treat for me to chronicle our conversation, particularly about fatherhood, since you've made such a difference in my life as far as being a dad. So I hope you get to come back again.
Let me just say, Mike, I really commend you for what you're doing with this father-friend ministry movement that you're engaged in, because I think it's very needed. It just so happens, I don't know if it's by accident or if God is directing traffic, but it seems like dozens of men have come my way over the last few years with similar issues with their kids, whether it was divorce related or whether it was because kids are acting up as kids do, or some struggles with their work, and they're just looking for help. And I think we as men kind of think we got to keep it all under control and we're in charge and we don't need help. It's a real breakthrough to actually ask for help, to ask for prayer, to ask for advice. And once we do that, and I don't know, there's something about me, I guess people feel comfortable asking and talking about such things. And it's been a blessing for me to get an opportunity to help them. And I think what you're doing is accomplishing that job, and is hopefully having the effect on many, many men out there who are going through the same thing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's something to celebrate when younger dads look to men who are ahead of them on the path, and getting experienced people who have already been there is priceless. So again, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.
This has been the Father Friend Podcast. Thanks for listening today. I'm Dr. Mike Ayers. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with other dads. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at mikea@fatherfriend.net with comments, questions, and your biggest takeaways. For more tools, resources, and real talk on fatherhood, visit fatherfriend.net or follow on social media @ThinkingDads. See you next time.